So I'm very pleased to see all of you here on this cold day. We have some sunshine between snowstorms and things. We're going to go back in time today. I see a number of people in the audience who've spent many a year here in Lincoln. How many have been here at least 50 years? Want to raise your hand?
50.
50, right?
Very good. At least 50.
Okay.
60. Oh, come on. Yeah? Very good. You're justifiably old-timers. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to remember our childhood. I certainly remember mine, and war played a very important role in that. My maiden name had initials of AEF, which of course was American Expeditionary Force, and I see headlines and AEF does this, and AEF, oh, that's great. You know, I'm accomplishing all these things. Fantasy. But, you know, with all the privations we have, you wonder sometimes whether the kids nowadays, how they would do. They probably would adapt, but it wouldn't be easy. John Cowles has done a wonderful job and an enormous amount of work digging through the archives and finding all kinds of things to show and tell. Hopefully we'll have time after the program for some reminiscences from the audience. But Harold McAleer would like to start off with a presentation of his own. Harold?
Is that right? I didn't know that. John's presentation, I have just his aid. And we'll begin with something familiar to us all.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairie to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. From the green fields in Virginia to the gold fields out in Maine. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet
All right, Harold.
John Cowles.
Well, I don't think you can talk down there. They just quit right on ahead here. Welcome to the pregame show. For a couple of hours, you'll be entertained better. This is about the war that came after the war to end all the wars. World War I was supposed to be the end.
Shut up, man.
And Harold was beaming me up. This all started with the Lincoln Elementary School class of 1948. We're sort of a loyal class, and we kept reunioning, and we had our 66th last October. And I had the idea, why don't we remember what happened in World War II? We just exchanged anecdotes, and we said, this is so great, we should be telling other people about these neat things. Just to remind you, Lincoln was a small town in around 1940, 1941. We were 17 people, 12 boys, 5 girls, and we went to the Little Red Schoolhouse. That was a school, not a Mason's Hall at the time. And we went to the town hall, which you would think of as, it's formerly known as the Center School. And then Lincoln didn't have no high school. Of course, we got on either Western or Concord. So, but this is the, Harold, I don't know what I got there. Can you explain to me what is that?
Not to worry, my man. Not to worry.
Okay, I will do not push the button. Gotcha. All right. There's a little agenda here today. I'm going to talk, and then, as I said, that we will have time for anybody out here who wants to give reminiscences. However, the reminiscence should be of the order of the things I'm showing you. 20-minute dialogues. There's a large man at the door who will escort you out. So you can. We'd be glad to hear 2 or 3, minute things, but not a lot of stuff. And questions and answers, of course. And then, as you see on the tables over here, I went into the vault of the Lincoln Library and ended up with 675 pages. And there they are. And what I want to say is that what you'll see there, each bullet is basically a headline. It's like you picked up the Globe and it said, war starts or something. But you really want to read the article that comes to you after that headline. And that's what I've got stacked on the tables over there. Feel free to browse through them after today. But also the library has agreed to put them in the Lincoln Library History Room in a box. So I will put that down. It'll stay there for, I don't know, a month or 2 or 3. And they're considering putting it in the vault so that it's permanently kept there. So but I think if you were all interested in what said you might want to go and look at the original articles it came from. All right. Let's see. We're going to talk about the federal and state real quick, and then talk about Lincoln, what Lincoln did to its town departments and with the wardens, how they were organized. I did some crosscuts of things that keep popping up as you read the stories. The air raid warden is the essential troop in this thing. Everything revolves around him. He doesn't just prepare for air raid wardens. If the paratroops were to land outside now, he'd call the warden and say, help, we got to do something. So he's responsible for everything. We had a lot of blackouts and response to something that might happen to us. The women's roles is very interesting, and you can find, we'll talk about the canning committees and what happened. Strategic materials is otherwise known as rationing, and it's some interesting stories about how Lincoln set up its rationing boards, what you had to do, how hard you had to beg to get a gallon of gas. And then we'll talk about the children, and we'll go into the personal reminiscences of the class of 1948. Okay, slide 1 is, this is my total federal, we're going to get away from the federal government fast, but December 7th, 1941 was Pearl Harbor Day. And you see there by the 18th, Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the ex-mayor of New York, and Eleanor, got on a plane and immediately went to the West Coast and did a tour of pecking the people out. Got back to Washington and issued their very first pronouncement, which the central core of it was not governors or other senators or representatives. It's like people in the towns, get your local defense agencies together. The Office of Public Safety is what it's called. Committee on Public Safety for all the little towns. So they immediately said, do that, towns get ready. And the Massachusetts Committee on Public Safety, MCOPS, says this is like 2 days after Pearl Harbor. So you know that they weren't writing furiously. They had been planning this out for a year or 2. I think one thing you'll see as we go through is that Pearl Harbor was a big shock and surprise. Well, yes, Pearl Harbor was, but the fact that we were going to get hit was expected. And they now say, since Sunday afternoon, we've been thinking very hard on what to do, and we think we're ready to go. The 16-point action list, I'm not going to read it all, but this is 2 days after Pearl Harbor. And when they come up with 16 points saying, establish all report centers that are not ready, recruit and train adequate personnel for 24-hour service in your local report center, assign people to various services, first aid parties, rescue parties, demolition parties, decontamination parties, etc., and so on. And it goes on 16 points. They had this thing ready to fire. When Pearl Harbor happened, they fired.
Question, John,
Yes.
is this the right one that we're looking at? This ain't your bulleted one, is it? Do we have the wrong one up there?
Yes.
This is
This is not the right one.
not the right one. Let's,
I'm sorry.
let's,
I didn't, this is not the right one. I don't know how you, let us go back. This is not legible, so I did it in PowerPoint. This is in Word. I read it in PowerPoint.
let's wait a second.
Yeah. We're not looking at the PowerPoint. This software is softer than it should have been. Yeah, Harold, thanks. Thanks, Harold. This one I realized is not visible, so I went and read it in a visible form. Yeah.
No, that's the same one.
It is the same one?
Hang on, let's just wait a second.
I gave you, I got a new disc.
I
I have it back.
Where's your backup? You got this?
This is in PowerPoint. When we did the dress rehearsal, Harold,
I know.
it was just great.
It went smoothly.
It went smooth.
You could tell we didn't grow up with technology.
Yeah, right, we didn't have this kind of software.
Oh, well.
Software was taking time.
Well, there's a software developer up in the back there.
I'm all puzzled as to what happened.
Don't worry about a thing.
I guess, I did want to repeat that you feel free to go through the stuff because these are backs up the headlines I'm going to show.
God bless.
Yeah, Harold, you would have overvoiced Kate. Kate, gone.
Land that I love.
It's amazing. This couldn't have happened because after all, when we read 2 days ago, it was the PowerPoint.
Through the night.
Okay. In Nerd Talk, what we just did is go from font 14 to 36. So now you can read 36. How are we? Oh, I'm not going to do that again, obviously. The crosscuts and the anecdotes. Fiorello and Eleanor were there, and this is what, you can see what they, Committee on Public, MPOPs, I call it. Long thing. Okay, I was telling you about Leverett, and he was still pumping out Executive Order #1. But I noticed that again, every time one of these came out, it said local committees, the Lincoln Committee on Public Safety, get it, do it, and so they were aiming right at it. I like the one about the Civil Defense Office in Massachusetts said the period of doubt and argument is over. So you get the opinion that there was some isolationist among us, and that they were to sit down and shut up. They were going to go at it. This is a strange one.
No, she's talking about your mode of presentation.
All right, now, the center, the nerve center for every town was called a report center. And it has about 40 functions. It does those things that raise war bonds and show morale movies. It keeps track of everybody in Lincoln. You'll see that there were 273 people in Lincoln that were active in the civil defense of the town. They were also make sure the railroads and the roads and the power and the water were not attacked by the enemy. And one of the things that comes up, if you read the papers over and over again, is the thought of an evacuation. The paratroopers were going to land in Weston. The people would flee. We'd have to house 500 people from Weston. Are we ready? We got a place for them. We got food. People, can cook it up. So worried a lot about emergency evacuations. Here are some of the things that the Lincoln Report Center did. I don't know if I said it, but they made the brilliant decision to put it in the town hall, which is a good place for the report center. It's also known today as Bemis Hall. So here was the report center. They worried about fifth column, things that we don't talk about today, but spies, unexploded bombs. I mean, they were trembling about all this stuff. I noticed, I don't know if I put it down here, but Sumner Smith did make some statements to the press that it's really unlikely that Lincoln is going to get bombed or have paratroops, but we're ready just in case. So that was the attitude of every town. If Bedford or Lincoln, we were going to be ready. It's interesting they were empowered to rescue. If you went out and said, I want you to pull your shades down, and you said, poo on you, you're under arrest. The area wardens were the central troops, if you will. They had to take 11 courses, first aid, how to respond to various types of war gas attacks that were bad gases. The test is pretty tough. I mean, it isn't just, check yes or no. It's like, if the guy's lying there with a bone sticking out, what do you do? That kind of question. So they had to respond to anything bad that might happen. There was a lot of propaganda, obviously, if you put it that way, of when the warden comes to your house, he is your friend, do as he tells you, don't give him any hassle. Even if you hate his guts because he's your nasty neighbor, you just gotta do what he tells you. This is too busy, but there were 273 people that were identified in these lists. I have one folder just called Lists of Lincoln People, and then there'll be 50 and 100 people on some of these lists. As a, for instance, if a bad situation happened, every single section of every single road in Lincoln had a person assigned to it. So there would be, Joe Blow would take Trapelo Road from, one road from the center of town up to Normandy Barn or something like that. And even if something happened, he was to get out there and worry about what happened on that strip of the road. These mock attacks they were just blackouts. They would station hundreds of people around. They would even have people uniformed as Germans or U.S., and you were to respond accordingly to them. Don't get captured is one of the things that we come to the enemy. They would pretend to have house fires, and then as a warden, you would direct people to put it out, or there's an unexploded bomb on the front lawn, what do you do? So they were going through all the things that might happen. I noticed one thing about the blackouts. If they caught you not blacking out, your name appeared in the paper next day as a person of, ill repute. They monitored quite closely by region and state. And when postmortems were conducted, I mean, you got a report card afterwards. You did good, you didn't do. This I stumbled on. Lying there. I thought this was really kind of fun. Somebody had stuck this in anonymously. I don't have to read it to you. The gravel blonde one is always gets you. There was some other. If you had every crowd shelter, you need an angel Limburger that'll keep the space around you very well. There were things like if you were suffer a direct bomb hit, don't go to pieces, lie still. Well, you're already blown up, right? This memo went on, but I thought this is an interesting. This just sort of broke. They had a sense of humor in emails, and I think they said written in the memo was summoned. This is the best way to go, or something like that. Okay, let's go to some of the crosscuts. These are women's roles. There was a formal organization, and women were sort of, I wouldn't say second-class citizens, but there's a little bit of, we're tolerating you, but you will accept your help. When they said, what should we name ourselves? Women wrote back, Kitchen Commandos, and some snot over in Beacon Hill said, no Kitchen Commandos, that's reserved for our boys on the front. So they backed off on that one. She also put out a warning memo, said, now avoid conflicts and jealousies with the Massachusetts, the men over there in the state public service office. So women were there, and they were supposed to do everything. They were trained to be backup wardens. If the warden in your town was hit by a rock, you could step in. They did allow that women could have roles like meal warden. It was very important, and they did say, you've got to keep your family and everybody healthy. It's very important. Let me get to this one. There's like 70 people in Lincoln. I want to just get to some of the names. 13. Okay, I just, because some of these names you recognize. And if I can just find the right page here. Okay, here we go. There's 70 women, civil defense women. But I just reading this to say that, yeah, you recognize some of these names, Gordon. In the emergency feeding group, which was if an evacuation came and you had to feed 100 people would step up. Besides Smith, Winchell, Wheeler, those were women that were in that. Doherty, Eaton, Warner. For first aid, Farrer was on the committee. For the transportation committee were Brooks, Boyce of Boyce Farm, Fitz family. On the garden conservation, which was victory guns, basically, the name Winchell appears. For registration, which was keeping track of all the people doing things, we have Todd and Tarbell. And then again on the social services was Winchell again. So these names you still recognize as being around town. Don't mean I remember. There's an interesting editorial here, if you look, the one on strategic materials, also known as rationing, on the black market. And the guy writes this passion thing saying, you are a scumbag if you buy or sell things at above the price, don't you do that to that person. And so they really felt strongly about this. 1941 December, and apparently it wasn't sugar or gasoline, it was tires. Rubber comes from trees in Southeast Asia. We were immediately cut off from them. They went into immediate conservation action. Sumner Smith, who was heading up the Defense Council at the time in Lincoln, was ordered to set up a board of upstanding Lincoln men, 3 people who were not connected with the tire industry, to start rationing times. And so, a year later, we were collecting things like mail, Phoebus garage, got a ton of tin cans, rubber drives, scrap metal drives. We were out there, and the articles would go like, go up in your attic, go in your basement, go out in the yard, look in the barn, find stuff that you need, and those are tons. They're finding Fall Drive got 39 tons of metal. Fuel oil. So in 1942, they said we're going to be cut by half this winter. Get ready. We recommend you go to coal or oil. It even said, if you can't go to coal or oil in your house, we recommend you move in with someone else. I mean, I thought that was a little pushy, but that was their recommendation. When it's women, they even said, well, start to order it now. They said, women, you can even cut your own. I said, what are we, Kathy the Cutter here, as opposed to Rosie the Riveter? Women were supposed to get wood and heat their house. In April 43, the A card had 240 miles for household use and 90 for professional getting to work. They cut it from 300 back down to 90, and they said, and then there was a Lincoln rationing board set up, rationing, who you had to go to them, and every time you had to prove that you actually worked for Raytheon. If you picked up more than 3 people in a car, they call it the car club, and were taking a ride pool there, they would give you more gas, but each member of the pool had to sign a certified thing saying, yes, I really do ride with him, and you should give him another gallon of gas. So they were very careful. Up in the bulletin board somewhere around here, where to go? Oh, it's right by the door. I have what everybody got in the mail once a month, a great big sheet of what this month's rationing supplies were. And here's a typical one that for the one I have up there. You had 4.5 ounces of butter every week, 2 pounds of meat, cheese, but they had about 40 or 50 things of what you could hit, which was allows of that week. Silk stockings would be recycled. I laughed at typewriters because the article says, you know, we need to pump out a lot of paper. We're a bureaucracy and we're short on typewriters. So when the emergency, could you please have your typewriter? Give us your typewriter so we can get more bureaucratic paper out. Office of Price Administration is the black market kind of a thing. They really set ceilings on things and were very serious about not letting people gouge, as they put it in the building. All right, the Lincoln Courier is the local newspaper at the time of Pearl Harbor. And I just picked 2 days before Pearl Harbor. What was going on? Well, nothing much. The women were expecting something to happen. They were 310 women were holding bandages for an eventual something, I don't know what. The American Legion had this whist tournament, which they were really whining because people from Belmont and Waltham kept winning, and they said, what's wrong with Lincoln? Why can't we win our own whist tournament? And then the Bemis Lecture. And I was just looking at Voice Prints of Lincoln a couple of days ago. Bemis Lectures go way back. I mean, people said there was nothing to do all the winter. Thank God for the Bemis Lectures. And here was what they had scheduled for 1942. And I remember them well, and they were mostly travel. It's darkest Africa. Nobody could find Africa on a map. Here's a guy talking about darkest Africa. And that's pretty much what they were doing. They had a boating college. Glee Club came probably cheap. But you could get the Lincoln Courier for $1.50 a year. Of course, that was real money. Here's the week after. This is a week later. War comes to America. The evil character of the Japanese, Germans, and Italians come to the fore. 2 weeks later, Sumner Smith, who's the head of because telephones were more primitive in those days, you did have to go through an operator. They put direct lines into Doherty's, electric company, gas company, and over to Waltham, the regional center. So there was nothing, when you picked up the phone, it didn't say operator, it said, hello, I'm Doherty's. You know, you went right to it. Bypass the operator. You recognize the name Robert Normandy, I think he's in charge of health services. Well, 3 weeks after, the paper said, wait, we're going to celebrate Christmas, by God. So this is what they said. We're not going to put any big stories in, and we're going to, in fact, they have a funny line in the back of the story which says, Santa Claus, the embodiment of all Christmas things, or the barrel-shaped embodiment of all Christmas things. Why should he rain for just a day? We're going to make him rain for a week. We're not going to talk about anything but Christmas stories for a week. They do end it with, however, folks, don't forget we have a war. All right, this is interesting what happened around this time. This is the 1st of January, they meet Pearl Harbor. Weston, there was a big meeting in Weston at the ARP. This is the Air Raid Precaution. You see ARP mentioned all the time, and you're supposed to know that that means Air Raid Precautions. ARP meeting in Weston, 400 there, Lincoln's 50 wardens, they've grown to 50 by now. And they lectured them from the state and federal level about what you had to do to get your act together. Because the phone lines were not what they are today, no satellites, they said, hey, you know what it says, don't make any long distance calls because you're going to block the emergency response of this country. There was an article on search your basements and attics and barns and find little flashlights because you may find yourself in a bomb shelter in the dark, so you better be ready for that. China appeals to America after Japan. It turns out that we were very sympathetic to China all of a sudden because they had been attacked by the Japanese. And when I read the articles, I said, I now understand why my mother kept saying, eat your food and think of the poor starving Chinese people. And I said, why did she say that? Well, I don't think the Chinese. Well, we had split up our food and we were actually sending a bunch of food to China to feed them because they were starving. So now I know what my mother meant 75 years after she said it. Okay, well now we're marching along month by month through the Lincoln Courier. Here's the people that were enthusiastically ready for the draft. Those that had low numbers in the lottery were saying, let us out, and I think that was the attitude. People were very patriotic in those days. But on the home front, Mrs. Matthew Doherty was giving appreciation in the Lincoln Courier that day because she had asked people to send gift boxes for the troops at Fort Devens. And they had responded, they sent up a lot. Then we got a lot of nice letters back from Fort Devens, and so she's saying, the troops, the boys really, they always come to the boys really appreciated your gifts. I kind of wondered about this one. There's a big ad in the Lincoln Courier that says, hey, dog owners, you won't get any canned dog food, for the next few months. Rush out and buy it, grab it. That's not patriotic, but anyway. And so that was one ad that got my attention. Judy Garland was the favorite. Now, in terms of today's dollars, this doesn't mean much. This is for sidewalk pothole repair or something, but this is what the budget was. I did envy them. They had a town skating rink. I don't know if we had one. They had one. Nobody voted much because nobody contested it. Politics, they were busy doing war things, and they just didn't even run anyway. I should say, who were the people that were in these offices that weren't contested? Well, Davis, Farrer, Donaldson, DeNormandy, Flint, Kelly, Kelleher, Cunningham, the names that I recognize as good old boy Lincoln names. March they did the first blackout, and Lincoln, this was a unit of 4 towns, so that they could get them to see if the whole area was kind of black. They flew over it. It was very good. I don't know if anybody had the lights on, but they didn't mention it, and they wanted people to ride the railroad, so they knocked the fares down. You could go to Boston to Weston for 35 cents. You could go to Wayside Inn for 60 cents. Please ride the trains. The Boy Scouts were recruited. I was Cub Scout at the time, so not me. But they always talk about messengers. If all else broke down, you send a Boy Scout out to run over to the Westland. You guys know Little West. It's like a marathon. We're all dead at the feet of the Westland Town Hall. And they trained them at first aid, just in case you're a Boy Scout walking around and somebody is hit. Get rid of junk campaigns. They turn in your kids' rubber toys. They don't need them. They live without them. Newsstand pulls and strings. I I do remember riding back to trucks and and going down streets, picking up great piles of newspapers and throwing them on the trucks. And we measured what we did in tons. We would do that every so often. They want you to, again, do lumber. I would have put aluminum in, but it didn't fit on the list of things they were saving. Pageants were big in the 20s and 30s. People, instead of plays, they did pageants. And of course, this was one in the school system, a patriotic thing. They did pageants for American history. This over in Sudbury and beyond, the government took 3,000 acres for an ammunition depot, and with the article will tell you, many historic homes, there was very little objection. Now nowadays, FOMO would be out there with guns, but no, they just said it's war, it's a war, and they just lay down, and I don't think they burned the homes, but they did protest. The government took the historic homes. By April and May, they were beginning to get into photo IDs, which we don't do now, but they did that. Sugar and gas rationing were coming in strongly, and if you were going to drive your car more than 13 miles a day, why did you do all that driving? Modern Minuteman was an actual taken from a headline. They had Minuteman in those days too, and the $1 billion a month was the record. It was like tithing. You were supposed to give 10% of whatever salary you were making to buy war bonds. They expected that. They still had a gigantic whist carnies. A whist, I'm told, something like rage. It's a card game of some kind. Anyway, the American Legion was now going to raise money for the local veterans hospitals. And the kids, I always had the feeling we were a bit isolated from the war. At St. Anne's, they were still doing a medley of songs, and there was a craft fair, and they called it the Stone Church. And all the kids were having a jolly time to kind of distract them from the bad things that were happening. Everybody had a large Memorial Day parade, Lincoln too. I don't know the Center School Band, which is now AKA the Town Hall now. I don't remember that, but there was a band. The United Service Organization, the USO, you probably remember, had sent everything to the troops they deserved. This isn't exactly a war thing, but got me. You recognize this is rather an important event in Lincoln history. In May of '42, after 3 years of lawyers and what had probably priests and what have you, they finally officially joined the two churches. 110 years ago, they had their fight. 100 years ago, the white church was built, and in May of 1942, the churches finally joined under the name First Parish in Lincoln at that very time. Here's an interesting equivalent, is that if you turn in your flat iron, because that'll make 4 hand grenades, measure your garden hose, because for every 25 feet, you just did 7 gas masks to protect the troops, and so on. So they were pushing hard. Dogs for Defense article is fun in that it says, let your dog come and serve in the war. And then they said, we really prefer kennel dogs. We would not like any home pets because they have bad habits. So you discourage them turning in your pet because he probably has bad habits. Monster Parade happened. The Lincoln Mohawk, Junior Mohawk and Mohawk games followed the big parade. And with a little research, I found that the Lincoln Junior Mohawks were not kids. They were actually just sort of a B team. They weren't quite as good as the Mohawks. If there's any juniors here, I
apologize.
Okay, so the guy that runs in the Lincoln Courier, he did 3 other papers too, Weston and Sudbury, Wyoming. And he's joining the war anyway. So he says, this is it. It's all over for the Lincoln Courier. But we're going to have a page over the Concord Journal. I probably should have gone to the Concord Library and see if I could dig up this page, but shortly thereafter, a new thing called the Lincoln Bulletin came in. And the Lincoln Bulletin was expressly to cover war events in Lincoln. So this was a gold mine. I finally found the nugget here because this is now, I've reproduced every single page from the Lincoln Bulletin over there on a folder called the Lincoln Bulletin. It's a legal size paper, and it's just lists all the things that went on. I have a lot of time to talk, but I can say a lot about each of these. You'll find a lot of things in these committees. The Canning Committee, I can't, with all due immodesty, say we had a founding mother of this thing was Mrs. Addison Cowles, which I now understand why all war long there were mason jars and steaming pots on the stoves in our house. And we raised a lot of vegetables, and she put them up for somebody to correct me. We put them by. It depends on what part of Lincoln you came from, apparently, whether you put them up or put them by. But the Canning Committee was there because nutritionists said that a person needs 100 pints of fruit or vegetables be healthy. But racing only gave you 35. How do we make up the 65 missing? Well, we have victory gardens, and then we put it up. And the racing board's interesting. They started in to open 5 days a week. The Waltham Hospital, where whatever that was, a lot of Lincoln volunteers went over and helped to clean rooms and so on. What else? There's a lot of subcommittees in the service grounds recreation stuff. Is there dances and stuff to keep the troops happy? I love the fact that if you have bees, you know, we need the wax folks. You know, hold on it. The Red Cross was really doing lots of things. I never understood why. I learned how to swim in the Walden Pond on the Red Cross swimming class, but apparently they felt that was something that had to be done during the war, so all those kids were taught how to swim in Walden Pond. So the United War Fund, again, they're trying to raise bond money. These people were not to go up and demand a check. They would go up and encourage people to buy war funds. The 73 categories of Victory Garden, most of them were fruits and vegetables. I was amazed to find out that my father had headed up the Fruits and Vegetables Committee, so this became fall harvesting in September, became a big thing, and it lasted for years after the war. The Middlesex County Extension, you think of the extension now as telling you how to raise tomatoes, but in those days it was like, hey, there's no plumbers or electricians left, so come over and we'll tell you how to keep your house going. By yourself without help from people that should be fighting the war. Now, by 44, they were really cracking down on people who, you know, sneaking gas into the tank, and you had to prove that you had really needed it. The milkweed floss, the government pays 20 cents a pound, and I'm thinking my parents cheated me. I never getting a cent for it, but I collected bushels and bushels of milkweed floss. We all
Takes a lot of milkweed to make a pound.
Yeah, I know that. There was a $5 prize for the person that collected the most. If I know that, I might have picked that faster. People ask me, well, what did the town nurse do? Well, this is over. One thing she did was they ran a well-child clinic, and free. And you came in and brought your kid in, and she got to make sure he was okay, or he was okay. And that was because during the war they didn't want anybody to get sick. Okay, the Lincoln Bulletin, which is war stories. Only appears twice and then it goes away. I was at Thursday morning the Museum of World War II in Navy. Who knew? But I found out about it. Some people out there have been to it. And having worked in the nuclear weapons world, and people tell me, well, it really wasn't the bomb that ended the war. Well, I looked at the headlines and it was the bombs went off on August 10th, Japanese surrendered on August 14th. I have a feeling that the bomb had a lot to do with the Japanese surrender. But also everything just went down. The last Lincoln Bulletin appeared in August, and it was mostly non-war news. It was like, okay, we need a newspaper, and we're going to talk about everything going on in Lincoln now. And so that's the end of Lincoln Bulletin. There's still a lot of wounded people at Fort Devens, and they need, you know, pitiful stories about how they need their nerves are shot, their arms and legs are healing, you know, please help. Well, we were still raising things. We were up and functioning in the world, of course, right after the war. Collecting clothes, Boy Scouts. I was still out there in the truck. The Harvest Festival was a big deal. I remember going to the Harvest Festival. They added a category called home pets, and you put your pet in a cage. You competed with all the other pets. My sister always put our cat in, and our cat never won. I have a feeling it was rigged, because we had beautiful cats. I don't know why they never won. Okay, I'm talking about youth. One of my crosscuts was youth. Here's a memo written in the 18th, right in the same month as the war happened. Sumner Smith, it says, the school committee, he apparently was on the school committee. If a warning comes that the planes are coming at us, we will scatter them, we will load people on the buses and scatter them around. And I don't quite know what the theory of that was, but I guess if a bomb fell, it would only kill one kid or something. All the rest of them would be somewhere else. Teachers were part of the whole effort, and teachers were trained in first aid, and kids will all now have ID tags. So, you know, for some reason they all got dispersed and were running around. You know, at least you know on the kid's arm was an ID tag. Interestingly, that at recess, they would send around troops of actors to do the air raid. And there was somebody would make a siren. I can remember some of this. A siren would blow, and all these people would run around and go to the shelter and do the right thing. And we kids would, that was our recess, and we weren't playing basketball. We were watching the play called the air raid. At the summer playgrounds, the kids themselves took part. The whistle blew, and the kids would pretend they were responding well to an actual air raid. And in the Boy Scouts were taught to help take care of younger kids. They were kids. Now, let me get on to the actual thing that started all this. What do we remember from the class of elementary school, the class of 1948? Well, here's something that we all remember very well. Each classroom had an American flag. Every morning we repeated the Pledge of Allegiance while saluting the flag and recited the King James version of the Lord's Prayer. I'm sure that somebody would protest now that this is terrible and indecent and awful. We never thought it. We just went to school and did it every single morning. We always came with some money, and we would buy some stamps, and we paste them in our book, and when it got to be $18.75, we'd give it to somebody who claimed they would give us $25 in 10 years. But one day this Jeep shows up, and the guy from Hanscom, and he says, you know, you kids, all the classes over all the years have got enough war stamps to buy a Jeep, so your reward is we're going to give you a ride in the Jeep. I don't think there's a person in the elementary school in Lincoln that does not remember the Jeep ride. They'd already fitted a few of us at a time, and he drove around the field a few times, and I remember it was, your family got very sore, there weren't springs on Jeeps, but it was interesting. And at the very end, as somebody, I'd forgotten about this, if you think of the town hall, it's now the town hall, it's very steep as it comes up the Lincoln Road, and the guy kind of waved me by and went straight up that hill, and I said, my God, cars can't do that, but the Jeep did it. So that was our experience with Jeeps. I love this one because I wasn't there at the time, but Herd of Pigs was there. The convoy of troops were going by. The lead guy said, go catch them pigs and return them to wherever the pig farm was. And they did. And Mrs. Snelling, if there's any Snellings in the crowd, was the person that was behind all that, and said to the lead officer, well, who were those people? They were German war prisoners. And they got back in the truck and drove to Devon's, and I thought, well, why did they do that? Why didn't they escape? And I thought, no, wait a minute, 3 meals a day, nice walk. They got right back in the truck and went up to Fort Devon's. We had telephone operators with 3 different, and yes, you pick up the phone and say, number please. You say Dottie or Sally or whichever operator you were talking to. I noticed our number was 208, we're still at 8208. I wonder if that, for 75 years, is that number lived? Chance in 1,000 that it isn't. That was what we did on a winter day. We didn't have television. We listened to Tom Mix and the Lone Ranger, and, and I mean, somewhere around where Tonto and the Indian and the Lone Ranger were messing it up. They stopped the program, and there was these bells, bong, bong, and then some deep stentorian voice comes on and says, President Roosevelt has died. Oh my God! I told my mother to. Oh my God! But those are those things you remember. You remember the day that the buildings were struck in New York City, 7/11. That was my remembering of the death of Roosevelt. I didn't remember this, but a lot of the other classmates did. That if you had traffic out there, you didn't want that enemy plane to look down and see where the traffic was, so you blacked out the top half of your headlights, which is just an interesting phenomenon. When we went to school, the Little Red Schoolhouse, there were boys and girls, keep them apart. And if you spaced the schoolhouse, the girls' half door was on the right, the boys on the left. And in this playground, we kind of kept apart. It was an interesting, nowadays look here. In the center school basement, also known as the town hall these days, but the center school basement, one half of it was home ec, and they had fixed stoves and everything. The girls took home ec, and the boys would learn how to use tools in the shop and everything. And I don't think anybody would ever suggest, gee, I'd like to take home ec, or some girl would come over and do shop. And that was not how we did it. There were roles to be played. I mentioned that all of this stuff that goes on, well, we started in at age 7 and it was over at 11, and we just thought, nobody ever, sugar's is rare, rubbers and tires are bad. It was all very normal. I don't really remember thinking, oh, how strange and odd, because we had no frame of reference for it. We did collect the tin cans of the milkweed constantly, all during the war. One of the things that we remembered was the wood. It looked like Christmas. You go out and say, look at the shining tinsel hanging off the trees. Well, MIT was dropping tinsel, little strips of aluminum, testing the blocking of radar, because they did block the radar, and they also left the woods looking like Christmas. But it was an interesting phenomenon. They set the clocks ahead to save energy, and you say, it is now 3 o'clock Eastern War time. They always remember, they always say that. Whether that did save energy, nobody knows. This was witnessed by several people. A bag of sugar fell out of a car, and everybody ran over and scooped it up and put it in their pocket and went home, because after all, you couldn't, this was a rare, this is manna from heaven, this sugar. All of us kids remember the margarine, which was white and ugly, but they gave a little ball that you broke and you needed it. What better for a kid to do than just keep twitching this thing until the whole thing kind of looked like butter? Not really, but sort of. I have a Spam table back there. And if you go on the internet, you'll find there are hundreds of memorabilia on Spam. And I made a little joke sheet there last night that said, I have kept these 4 cans of Spam, 4 different varieties of Spam for 75 years in my safety deposit box. And I said, just kidding, I bought them at Donovan's yesterday. Because you can buy them today or tomorrow, they still sell 4 kinds of Spam, which blew my mind. Also, where did they... And why are emails, bad emails called spam? It comes from a Monty Python skit where he's describing junk emails. They're just awful, they're horrible, they're everywhere, you can't get away from them. He says, sort of like spam. And so he was likening junk mail to something that's everywhere, spam. We used to go up, and Julian would show us, I don't remember him personally, but we showed movies, and he let us into his mansion. The front, what we think it was the back door, it was in fact the front door that faced the light, and we'd go up top and go in. Okay, this is very egotistic, but this is my memories, because we were quite war oriented, and I still have a chicken coop out back. I told my wife it was a potting shed, and she said, okay, then you don't have to tear it down, and it's a potting shed. Chicken coop we should put down. We raised 50 chickens, we sold their eggs. After about 3 years, chickens kind of don't lay well, so it was, we had chicken for that Sunday. We hatched chickens from fertilized eggs that came in the mail. And these eggs were candled. Some magic process. The guy would look at them and say, yes, I've thrown out all the roosters. All these eggs are guaranteed to be chickens. Except that we would, about 2 or 3 months later, we got a cock-a-doodle-doo come from the chicken yard and say, well, okay, chicken tonight. We'd find the rooster and eat it. We raised these eggs, I just have to say this, it's interesting, with a 101 bulb in the box in the kitchen. You get them in February or so, and they get big enough to put out in the yard at the time and snow melt it. And it was quite an exercise. I don't think I could carry 100-pound bags of grain that we used to every week, but that's how we did it. Yeah, our neighbor had a goat, and then would eat these, when it ate weeds, I don't know if you know this goat's milk taste. The stuff you buy in the store, these goats were not fed on weeds, I'll tell you that. And the only way you could get it down, I can remember, was literally hold your nose and just, my father was patriotic, and we said these Japanese things, they attacked Pearl Harbor, said, we're going to get rid of these fireworks. He threw them in the fireplace and threw a match into the house. I mean, shooting across the living room. I don't want people to think of this, I can't sleep. The house didn't burn down, grace of God. This has a sad ending. We went to coal stove. We had pot-belly glowing red coal stoves all through the war. And you always had that decision: do we leave the bedroom door open at night and stay warm, or do we freeze our fannies off and shut the door? Because the reason you'd shut the door is, you see, you'd get poisoned by sea air. Well, one day I was feeling cold, and I said, I'm leaving the door open. It's too cold tonight. And I got up and fell unconscious on the floor with a crash. My mother woke up, and thank God, 2 doors down was a doctor, and since I'm standing here today, he must have done the right thing. But after that, my bedroom door was shut, even though I froze my panties. It's better to have a frozen panty than to die. I left with the thought that it's hard to explain. You people are of an age that you don't even, why do I bother to say this? Well, because most people around today weren't there during World War II, but in the years about. It was the first of a kind for everybody. And there was this very apprehensive fear that we were going to all end up speaking German, or people were very good, there would be bombs. Paratroopers were going to land. There were bombs going to fall on Lincoln and everywhere. And so that's why I think the country responded so patriotically. We thought, oh God, we better just get going here and work at it. And my final thought is that people in post-World War II have never lived in a place where America as a country was seriously threatened out of its existence. And it's never happened since then, but it happened then. This is my references, and you can look at them in the view graphs. And there's some of the home front books that I got out of the Minuteman Library System. That's pretty much the end of the talk. I would say that these books give you the non-Lincoln background, and it's kind of interesting to see the kind of music and songs that went on. But I promised that I would open it up, and it's been 59 minutes, so we have a whole minute.
But first,
Yeah.
If anybody has any short reminiscences of their experiences during World War II, we'd love to hear it.
When was the Nike site put in?
Pardon me,
When was the Nike site put in?
I have selective amnesia. I was gone from Lincoln for 15 years, so I know nothing about the Nike site, except that it's rumored to have existed. Does anybody else know the Nike site?
In the 1950s.
50s, okay.
Part of the Cold War.
Yeah. I was in California, Michigan, Maryland, not any other. Yes?
I was born in 1945. The parents always told me that as a child, one of the first things I did was to run around the house singing "Praise the Lord" and pass the ammunition. Where did that come from? I never.
that was a song. That was a song.
It is one of, and if these books, oh, you turned it off, but anyway, in the home front book, you'll see they'll call music of the war. And there's probably 50 songs that were, and that was a popular song, Praise the Lord, pass the ammunition. And we'll all stay free. I remember the next line, and we'll all stay free was the line that follows.
Well, there was a story behind it. The story was the minister, I guess, who was fighting in the war. And they asked him, tell us, make us feel better. What should we do? Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. So it's a very popular song.
There were a lot of, Al, we were going to play you a bunch of songs, but there's just too many that we couldn't decide. Kate, we opted for Kate, whom people might still remember. Any other questions?
I was going to add that the various service songs were popular too. The Marines and the Army Air Force and all those songs were very popular.
Sure. And others, over there, over
Well, that
there.
was number one, but they brought it back.
Yeah, that was pretty.
Yeah. Mersey Dotes, oh, that was just songs. Go.
I was raised about 300 miles west of Chicago, and in a farming area, and my father was the kerosene dealer, took the fuel out to the farmers, and when rationing came in, he complained to Washington that they weren't taking into account the kind of land the farmers had. So the guy that had the sandy soil, he could blackmail his, black market prices, his rationing coupons to the guy who had mucky soil, because it took a lot more gasoline to plow and tend his field. So they put him on the National Rationing Board. And he would go to Chicago for meetings, and I remember taking him down to the train at night for the 250 or 300 mile trip into Chicago. And I also remember I got one pair of shoes per year. And in the springtime, my parents would cut the toes out so that I could wear them a little bit longer. I'm sure many of you remember that too. But I had to take the gasoline rationing coupons and paste them on a big sheet so they could go to Washington. And boy, that was even more than money, making sure that you could account for all the gasoline that he sold by the coupons that he had. So that was really important. And I got to do that at about age 6.
One quick anecdote is, how many of you darn your socks every week? All right. There's one person who forgot how to forget. But my mother and everybody, you've got a pair of socks persuaded. But at the end of the war, you just say, but
I still do.
you still,
I got the darning egg, so,
Yeah, darning it. But my mother used
Find
to,
the young.
yeah, my mother used to take the collars off my father's business shirts and turn them over so that any fray
Sure.
would be on the other
Sure.
side.
that's right.
Yeah.
The shirts last twice as long as you turn the collar.
That's right.
A lot of people might be interested. I grew up in Stonington, Connecticut, along Long Island Sound, and maybe Lincoln didn't have to worry about spies, but people around where I grew up did worry about it. They worried about the U-boats coming into Long Island Sound. And in fact, they never did come in, but 3 German spies did land on Long Island. They were captured almost immediately and probably shot. And we learned about it in the papers. And my mother, another incident, my mother started in a very tiny airport. My mother was an airplane spotter. And I remember her going off one morning early and coming back rather quickly because the person ahead of her had hung himself from the rafters of the shed. Those are my most vivid memories.
Well, in the stories that are there, you'll see things that don't, they used propaganda and people used to not talk, record things. And there's a story from Provincetown, Mass, about a ship, about the German U-boat sinking fishing boats. And they did, I found out later, we about cottage there, that a lot of fishing boats were sunk by the German ships, but you never heard of it because certain things just didn't get reported. Censored.
I grew up in East London, and I have many
Miss?
memories.
Miss? Try that, see if that works.
We were bombed out of our house,
Will you run around with that mic?
had to move in with my grandfather, and his house was demolished, we were all in it. And I woke up being carried to the air aid station by a volunteer who dumped me out.
Lucky you.
And your food rationing was pretty good.
Interesting. Ron, go ahead.
I'm Rod Rowe. I didn't grow up in the U.S. I grew up in a small company town in Quebec. However, I spent probably 20 minutes in 1945 in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And about the same time the next year. Well, how did that happen? I had an older brother. I was about 17 in 1944. And my older brother, who was a chemical engineer, invited me to accompany him on bicycles. We started on the at the Vermont border, Derby line, and rode our bikes through Franconia Notch, single-speed bikes, no gears, and we ended up in Winchendon, Mass. And the next day we were in a hostel at the Cambridge School in Weston. And looking at the maps, I must have ridden through a corner of Lincoln on 117 to get between those two places.
There were no border
I
patrols
have
in
no
Lincoln.
memory of Lincoln. The next summer, two of my brothers, and one of them was engaged, and his fiancée joined us, and we did exactly the same thing. Stayed in Winchendon and ended up in Weston. There were a lot of young people riding bikes.
Do you remember the term victory bike? I had a victory bike. It would encourage people not to have cars, and so we did it bicycles.
Anyhow, my memories of growing up in Quebec are very similar to what John has just told you. We had rationing. My family had a fair amount of land, and we grew our own vegetables. I remember my dad telling me, he said, "We eat what we can, and we can what we can't."
We did that too.
And I also raised chickens, as John mentioned, and there was a ready market for eggs. I remember delivering some of the produce from our garden around to the neighbors.
What about the Winchell clan here? Don't we get anything out of you guys?
Well,
Let's get the mic. Hold it. You-
No, I'm sorry. I had
Get the mic down here.
Go ahead.
All right. No, you, go ahead.
Oh,
Hand
who won?
give it the,
One of the
Enid.
in the articles, I have to go ahead, I'm going to say that they said, gee, in case of evacuation, we need to get some of the better off people in town who own station wagons. So there's a list of 8 people in town that own station wagons. It wasn't, you guys weren't on the list, but you were on the list of truck owners. So that you owned a truck and you were on that list. In case of an enemy attack, you would volunteer that your truck was going to take us all somewhere.
is that right? Is he right?
I just wanted to say that some of Mr. Winchell's land was taken for the Nike site, and he put up quite a grumble. He didn't like the idea of these weapons on his back gore, but nonetheless, he proudly sent 3 sons to the war effort, mostly in the Pacific, including my husband.
Hey, we've still got him. He's here. Let's hear.
Yes, I don't have very clear memories of that time, but I certainly enjoyed going to England to have a wife and bring her back to Lincoln.
That's right.
That's it.
Bundle from Britain.
That's right.
Yeah, she still is.
Well, Enid has some very good stories about growing up in London and then coming to the United States, because thousands of English kids were shipped over here to keep them safe, and she was one of them.
Another one over here.
Where?
Okay, oh, I can't see.
Another bundle from Britain.
Yes. We're lucky to have them.
Well, I'd like to say to the lady from East London that I was very fortunate that my family, though they were split up, I went with my mother and my sister to the country to be safe, and left my father behind. He was in London throughout the war in the Blitz, and he was bombed. But it was extraordinary. We had a remarkable time. We all landed on my uncle's family, and there were about 20 people in this house. I mean, it was amazing for a while. It was really, really crowded. And, but it was wonderful for a little girl. I was very, very little. And then my mother couldn't stand it because of the crowds, and the bathroom was just to say, a little crowded, very crowded. So anyway, we found our own little cottage in the next village, and that was fine. But then she did absolutely everything, you know, grew vegetables, chickens, wrung their necks, the whole 9 yards.
Wrung their necks.
The whole 9 yards, and we had clothes, never had new clothes, never. So my sister was the oldest, she had new clothes. The rest of us had all of her clothes, and then we would put in bits of curtains, you know, and so on and so forth. So everything was second-hand, and darned and mended, and we never ever went by car. We walked and bicycled everywhere. But it was.
There was a big do feeling, and my father was a school teacher, and he would bring home from the cafeteria in the school the leftover scraps of food.
Yes.
And we would give it to the chickens. We didn't even buy the chicken feed. We just recycled the food left over from the school cafeteria into the chickens.
Johnny?
Yo.
Remember
Go ahead.
building
Go ahead.
model airplanes during
Yes.
this time?
Balsa wood.
Balsa,
We did.
Black Widow, P-47.
We were taught to recognize the outlines of all those German planes, Luftwaffe planes. We never saw one.
That last Fokker was a Messerschmitt.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
Go.
I was growing up in Arlington just before we moved here
Yeah.
in the late 40s.
Shove it right
And
in
we
his
certainly
kisser.
did the Victory Garden, and we did the Victory Garden, and we certainly, I can remember my mother's pocketbook being full of those little ration cards and coins and so forth. But when we got here, I was always interested in what the big kids were doing, and the big kids included people like Kerm Steiger and so forth and so on, like Guardians and so forth. They were all into buying World War II surplus everything.
Yeah.
Japanese rifles, American
Insignia
armaments.
for American uniforms.
Absolutely, the
Everything.
whole uniform was nothing. Tents, fire extinguishers, radios, it was just wonderful. So we had a great deal of fun in the late 40s, early 50s, playing with all of this absolutely dirt cheap, top drawer quality United States Army surplus material, and it was just great fun.
Well, I'm thinking, so we went to the center school, and there's those big cedar trees off to the side. And we would sneak off, and we would have little markets in what we required for. So I'll trade you a sergeant stripes for a general's, medal. And we used to, this would go on every recess. We'd be trading World War II memorabilia, which was interesting.
Thank you, John, very much.
Yeah.
For this work.
That was terrific, John. I think anybody who wasn't alive then got a good idea of what life really was like.
Put on the Kate Smith
Shall we
afterwards.
say a little bit different from now?
And let it recycle.
I want to not only thank John, but also Harold, and I want you all to taste the goodies in the back of the room. Marion Liazos, who's one of our board members, has baked 2 victory cakes from an old World War II cookbook. And you've got to try them, because the idea was to use as little sugar as possible. So it's sweet potato cake and honey blueberry cake. So enjoy yourself, and thank you, Ariana. Do look at the material and the Historical Society books.
It will be in the Lincoln Library.